Ministries. I am Eddie's wife, usually sitting in the background, so no one hears me or sees me. But today, I'd like to do a Bible study with you guys about if women are being permitted to teach in ministry. Um, I brought this up because there's a couple of conflicting. You got that?
Yep, sounds good.
There's a couple of conflicting scriptures in the New Testament. Um, and I want to read those to you first. The first one comes from 1 Timothy 2:12, which says, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet." And the second one comes from Paul as the author in 1 Corinthians 14:34, which says, "The woman or women should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says." This 1 Corinthians 14:34. Um, so let's talk about those, and let's look at the life of Timothy. Timothy was the first author in 1 Timothy. He was the um, disciple of Paul. Paul met him um, as a younger guy. He started his ministry at around age 33 and up until his death at age 80. And he worked under Paul's teachings and guidance. He was raised by a Jew uh, mother named Eunice, and she she became a Jewish Christian actually after hearing Paul's teachings when he would come to Lysteria, which is where they lived. His father, Timothy's father, was a Greek. He was a Gentile, meaning he was not a Jew. And the grandmother of Timothy, on his mother's side, her name was Lois, and she too became a Christian. Both women were likely converted during Paul's first evangelistic journey to the city in 46 AD when he healed a crippled man, but soon after was stoned to death, and it says resurrected, but he basically survived his stoning, which would have been an odd thing to do, but he did it. So what I'm saying here is that Timothy, um, for him to say that he doesn't allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, all of his childhood um, and pre-adult teachings of Christianity came from his mother and his grandmother. So that's a little odd. We're gonna talk about Paul next. Paul, if you don't know who that is in the Bible, Paul was Saul. He was a Pharisee. He was a pretty bad guy, to the point that he was killing Christians for believing in Jesus. But then Jesus um, came to him and basically changed his heart and made himself real to him, and he converted completely and became Paul. So Saul became Paul, and Paul was a tent maker by trade. And um, along the way, along his ministry, he gives a lot of notability to certain women who were very important in his walk of learning about um, Jesus, of sharing the gospel, and they were instrumental in his life in doing that also. So let's talk about them for a minute. The women who were in Paul's circle. The most notable is a missionary and church leader named Priscilla. She's also referred in the Bible as her Roman name is Prisca. In 1 Corinthians 16:19, Paul mentions Prisca and her husband Aquila. And in 2 Timothy 4:19, after Paul's death, Timothy writes, "Great Prisca and Aquila and the household of," I'm not sure how to say this, Onesiphorus, who was a loyal friend of Paul's. she is mentioned one last time in Acts 18:26. A Jew named Apollos, a Jew named Apollos began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained the way of God to him more accurately. So, so it sounds like Priscilla and Aquila, they were husband and wife team, and they were both in ministry and both teaching men and women.
The second one associated with Paul and Corinth is Chloe. She's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 1:11-12. And although there's just a small part that is shared of her, the mention of her household, however, suggests that, according to women scriptures, this is a woman. She was likely head of her household, and thus possibly a widow, and as such is at least moderately wealthy. She had means and desire to sponsor Paul's missionary. If Chloe was the head of the household in Corinth, it is possible, if not likely, that she owned slaves and or had persons dependent on her and was well known in Corinth. Chloe was thus a woman who Paul held in high esteem for her leadership and abilities and faithfulness. And finally, Paul was also associated with a deacon named Phoebe. Yes, a female deacon. We will not hear that in more churches, but Phoebe was a deacon, and she had all the same responsibilities that a deacon would. She was a church leader at Concrete, which is one of Corinth's partners. There were also many sermons, prophetesses in the early church. Acts 2:19 mentions close to 400 daughters who prophesied. The role was significant as it involved speaking God's message to the people, further indicating that women were active participants in the ministry of the early church. So, I had a question. Why would somebody tell women that they are not allowed to teach or exercise authority over men, whether they are? Why did Paul say
That women should be kept silent in churches, for they were not allowed to speak but should be in submission, as the law also says. So, in my further investigation, if you look at what was going on at that time, historically and culturally, there were, in Corinth especially, and the area that they were in, you were surrounded by Greek deities. They were highly saturating not only the community but also the churches. Pagan cults that influenced the early church. Women played significant roles in cults and pagan deities in Corinth and its surrounding region in antiquity. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus is considered to be the seventh wonder of the world. Constructed in the 6th century BC, this grand temple showcased remarkable architectural innovation and artistic beauty. It was not only a religious site, but also a cultural hub, attracting pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. The temple was dedicated to Artemis as the protector of the city and its people. And I want to read to you real quick that the cult of Artemis is actually mentioned in Acts chapter 19, starting at verse 24. And I'm just going to read 24 through 34. It says, "Now a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of the goddess Artemis," and in parentheses Diana, "was bringing no small profit to the craftsmen. These craftsmen were called together, along with the workmen of similar trades, them making more men, making idols. Men, you are well aware that we make a good living from this business. You see and hear this is that not only at Ephesus but almost all over the province of Asia. This Paul has persuaded people to believe his teaching and has misled a number of people, claiming that gods made by human hands are not really gods at all. Not only is there danger that this trade of ours will be discredited, but also that the magnificent temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited, she whom she whom all Asia and the world worship will even be dethroned and lose her glorious magnificence. When they heard about this, they were filled with rage, and they began shouting, "Great is Artemis of Ephesus," or of the Ephesians. Then the city was filled with confusion, and people rushed together as a group in the amphitheaters, dragging along with them Gaius and Articus, the Macedonians, who were Paul's traveling companions. Paul wanted to go into the pagan assembly, but the disciples would not let him. And so it goes on a little bit, and for Paul to mention that in the book of Acts, um, you know, you have to know that these pagan cults were so dominant in that area, um, that even Paul was writing about it. And he even wrote letters to Timothy once Timothy started to have his own church and started to preach, trying to keep him grounded in that. Um, you also had other type of Greek gods. You had Aphrodite. You had Demeter, the Demeter cult in ancient Corinth, um, and and these were huge temples. I know the temple of Artemis was much larger than the temple of Solomon, and these people were doing things out in the community, not behind closed doors. This included and impacted the whole community. These pagan deities. You know, you also had Apollo, Sidon, Hera, Juno, Athena. So, in knowing all that, we can see that they would have an effect on the church and how the churches were run. Professor Sandra Gillan from Dallas Theological Seminary recently published a book, about the verses, "Nobody's Mother." Her thesis in this book is that the author of First Timothy is responding to the cult of Artemis, which was prevalent in Ephesus at the time, with priestesses leading the cult. This may have led to women displaying dominating behavior in the church in Ephesus, and she contends that these verses in First Timothy were never intended as a blanket prohibition for women to speak or teach a man. So more importantly, you know, we go back to Jesus. And what does Jesus say about women in the church? Jesus' words and actions reveal a groundbreaking view of women from his time, one rooted in respect, dignity, and inclusion. Far from sidelining women, Jesus welcomed them as disciples, engaged them in meaningful theological discussions, and entrusted them with pivotal roles, such as being the first witnesses of the resurrection. His interaction with women like Mary of Bethany, Mary Magdalene, and the Samaritan woman at the well showcase his commitment to spiritual equality and break the cultural norms that marginalize women. Through his parables and public teachings, Jesus continually affirmed the value and significance of women in the kingdom of God. This inclusive pattern continued in the early church, where women served as deacons, teachers, and prophetesses. While some New Testament passages appear to restrict women's roles, Understanding these verses in their cultural and historical context and through the lens of Jesus' overall message reveals a more nuanced view. Jesus' life and ministry consistently elevated women, and his teachings lay a foundation for their full participation in the life of the church. Now, some of the women who played pivotal roles in Jesus' life, of course, I've already mentioned Mary and Martha of Bethany. The woman at the well, why did Jesus choose a Samaritan woman to speak to at the well? It's pretty interesting. His conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4 broke social barriers of his time by engaging with her in deep theological discussions. Jesus showed that his message and salvation were for everyone, regardless of gender or social status. Mary Magdalene was another one. Mary Magdalene, we know she had demons. I don't know how many, but he chose her to be right there, and she was the first to see him resurrected. Um, these women, and there were so many more. These women provided financial support for Jesus and his disciples. Joanna, whose husband Chusa was Herod's administrator, Susanna, and many other women. So, in conclusion, how should we view women's roles in the church today? Based on Jesus' teachings and actions, we should view women as equal participants in the church. They should be encouraged to take on various roles and use their gifts for growth and edification of the church community. And I just implore you today that if you're a woman who has knowledge to share, I mean, we're all supposed to share the gospel with everyone. Everyone is instructed to do that. So, if you have your circle of people that you can influence that will listen to you, you know, don't be afraid to teach someone or share the gospel with them, or just share anything about Jesus. You can pick any topic from the Bible. It all leads to love. And that's all I have for you today. Um, this was kind of new, I know. I kind of went out there on the whole women. It's not about women's rights. I promise you that. It's not. It is about equality, and it is about what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to be compassionate enough and to share his love. And that's all I have for you. Y'all have a good evening. Thank you for joining us at our Hope Ministries. Right. Where?
It's at the bottom.